Learning how to tell a story can get you far in this world. It can also, as Bernie Madow and others have found, it can get you in trouble. But my job is to help people tell their stories. And I'm not really particularly interested in proving something, as journalists sometimes are, or editorial writers are. I'm merely interested in trying to let someone tell their story and help them tell it well. As a fundamentalist growing up in a very religious Christian home, I learned a lot about fundamentalism. So when I was asked to make a film on fundamentalism, I thought it was a story I could help the fundamentalists tell. And so I did. Here's a clip from it.
Son of the founder of the school which bears his name, Dr. Bob Jones, Jr., is now the chancellor of the school they call the world's most unusual university. Some have called it the West Point of fundamentalism. Being on this campus is like a step back in time. A time before civil rights protests or women's liberation, before miniskirts, the pill, and rock and roll. A time when right was right and wrong was wrong, and everyone knew the difference.
We're certainly glad to have you girls with us here today. And our topic is our discussion of God's Dress for Success program. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this little book, and it's got a lot of good fashion advice in it. But most of us aren't nearly as excited about hearing about God's Dress for Success program that's laid out for us in Scripture. I want you to listen carefully here. What he says in the 21st verse. Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins, and he did what? He clothed them. God has given us our clothes for a covering. God is saying he wants us to put on and to cover. If we are causing some fellow to have trouble with his thoughts, if he has started stirring emotions that cannot be satisfied, God says that is wrong. Now, there's not a chapter and a verse saying, thou shalt wear thy skirts only so many inches from the floor, you know. But the men themselves tell us that the more they see above a woman's knee, the harder it is for them to control their thoughts. Oh, cleavage is in. My test is simple. Bend over, girls. If you see the valley, it's too low.
Now, I'm sure things have changed a little at Bob Jones University. Where I graduated from Wheaton College, they finally allowed dancing. But the essence, I'm sure, was still the same. So I showed this sequence just to set up the idea of storytelling, which I really didn't need to do since the wonderful storytellers we've had already. But in my notion of how to tell a good story is to consider what I call the 3 I's. What is intrinsically interesting? And what was intrinsically interesting was the worldview of this university and of these students and of their professors. And then the second I is insight. How do I get insight into, and that isn't part of that clip, but it's a part of the film, how do I get insight into why fundamentalists believe the way they believe and act the way they act? One could do a film on any subject and address these same issues. What's intrinsically appealing? What will provide insight? Who will provide insight? And last but not least, how do you interpret it? The interpretation of the information and the insight, of course, is going to give it more impact, make it more effective, make it more appealing, make it more revealing, make it more significant. So the good storytellers are the ones who tend to raise money, who get supporters, who get elected to unfortunately sometimes, to offices that they may not really be competent in fulfilling the obligations thereof, but they're good storytellers. And so telling a good story is really crucial. And it was very interesting that each of the people that I found really, really appealing this morning, each told their story very well. I mean, the story of the building that school in Africa It's just a marvelous story, and you want to dip in your pocket and contribute to that. It was a motivating story. It was a moving story, a touching story. The story of the school, the story of, and of course, the unlikely story of the important significance and power of prime numbers. I mean, whatever possessed that man to think we would care about him and his prime numbers boggles the mind. But the way he told the story, we did care about it, and we got engaged with it. So he interpreted the story of prime numbers by the pacing, by the way he introduced it, by the images that he used, by the analogs he used. And we do it with music. We do it in many different ways. One of the pieces I wanted to show you and then decided not to, we used music from Fellini's Circus movie, because it was we wanted to wanted you to see this group doing what they were doing in a way that had energy and excitement, but it was playful. It was not too serious, though what they were doing was very serious. But sometimes we have to deal with issues that are more critical and more difficult. And the story is not a simple story of an individual or a group trying to overcome some obstacle, realize some potential, realize some goal. But it's a broader, more complex issue of the nature of an argument that incidentally remains today. In this case, it was the issue over evolution, on a film we made for Nova called What About God?
The majesty of our earth, the beauty of life. Are they the result of a natural process called evolution, or the work of a divine creator? This question is at the heart of a struggle that has threatened to tear our nation apart.
That's an outdated religious book. Science has shown you can't
For fundamentalist Christians like Ken Ham, evolution is an evil that must be fought.
You can't hold up your moral hand.
Well, I think it's a war. It's a real battle between worldviews.
For embattled teachers in Lafayette, Indiana, evolution is a truth that must be defended.
I think they think someone will come out a victor, and I don't believe that that's going to be the case.
If you look at the Bible,
For Christian students at Wheaton College, evolution is an idea that is hard to accept.
Where is God's place if everything does have a natural cause?
For all of us, the future of religion, science, and science education are at stake in the creation-evolution debate. Today, even as science continues to provide evidence supporting the theory of evolution, for millions of Americans, the most important question remains: what about God?
The original proposal given to me by WGBH Boston for this Nova series, since it was to be an 8-hour program on evolution, initially the proposal was called Fire and Brimstone. And I thought to myself, you know, it's pretty clear what your position is about the Christian view of creation. And it's not that I would argue with it, but I'm not going to do a film, which I never have and never would, that takes a position against any kind of group or individual. That's why I could do a film on fundamentalism and have Dr. Bob Jones University, you saw that clip, call me up and say, Bill, you're the first person who ever told us our story of fundamentalism in our university honestly and fairly. And I thought, that's good. He said, in fact, we've had hundreds of people calling who wanting to come to Bob Jones. And I said, that's good. Those people should go to Bob Jones. So the point is not to try and prove somebody wrong or right, but to try and reveal fundamental truths about who we are as human beings. That is what's so exciting about being a journalist or a writer or a filmmaker, is that you're constantly engaged in the process of discovering who they are, and therefore who we are, and therefore who I am. So, but sometimes I say the issue is not so simple as just who I am, but what's at stake. And I love films that ask questions. To me, the problem, one of the major problems today is that everybody's looking for an answer. Everybody's looking for something that is right. Rather than learning to live with the question, and see in the asking of the question rightly what truth can emerge. I'm tired of people who are telling me they know. But in the first place, I doubt they do. In the second place, what I want to know is, what's the question? And so when Nova called me and said they wanted me to do a film on evolution, and they wanted to do a film about fire and brimstone, I said, I won't do that film. I said, however, I will do a film, if you're interested, that deals with the question of how these religious people, who you would dismiss, how they deal with the issue of God and evolution. And I said, and I think we'll call it, What About God? It's not a matter of saying anybody's wrong, it's a matter of raising the question, what about God? And I think that, to me, as you think about your story, because you know we are all storytellers. That's how we got where we are, that's how we got in trouble, that's how we got out of trouble, that's how we enjoy being with one another. The story of how Westport won their soccer game today what a great story. I'm not going to tell it, but you can talk to Danny Jersey Hill or his father, they'll tell you. The stories of how we succeed, how America has become what it was, what it is, what it can be, the story of how this campus can be, how you as individuals can be, are stories worth telling. But I would ask you to ask yourself, what is my story? And not just what is my story to look around to see whether you have something that is worthy of attention, worthy of insight, worthy of interpretation. But what is worth telling? What is the story that you know, that you understand, that you want to tell and can tell? And is it worth telling? Well, you might be surprised. More stories are worth telling than you think. I remember going to talk to the minister at a church in Omaha, Nebraska, my first big film, which got a very nice Academy Award nomination. And I said to the minister, we're here because we want to do a film about the church's response to racial tension. He said, what are you coming here for? Nothing's happening in Omaha. Well, in point of fact, I knew there were things were happening, and I thought it would lead to some confrontation, which, as a filmmaker, I was saying, thank goodness it did, or I wouldn't have a film. And it did, and the minister was forced to leave his church. But people think they don't have stories, and I have never met anybody, after 10 minutes of talking to them, where I didn't say, you know, that's a good story. So you have a story. You have a story worth telling. Now tell it. Sometimes you may have to ask yourself, what is my story worth telling? And that's what I asked when the makers of Amadeus said to me, we want you to do a film on the making of Amadeus.
It was an incredible scene. It was 4th of July. And of course, that's not a holiday there. So we were working and we were shooting an opera scene. The camera was behind the stage, over the singers and dancers, seeing the whole theater full of audience, So we had like 500 extras there. And so I said, roll it, playback. And suddenly, instead of Mozart's music, American national anthem starts to play.
And out of the flies came this huge American flag and unrolled, unfurled on the stage. And 600 Czechs stood up and sang the national anthem of the United States and knew the words.
I get goose pimples when I think about it. All the extras stood up and either sang or hummed the Star-Spangled Banner with us.
All stood up except 30 men and women standing, panic on their face, looking at each other what they should do. That were the secret police, dispersed among the extras,
And I was sitting there thinking, good God, the Army's going to come and we're all going to go to jail. Because this is an act of rebellion.
It started when we crossed the border. We just were in customs and they said, okay, you can go on. Miller said to me, you're now in Czechoslovakia, forget logic.
I suppose as an artist, and those of you who are poets or writers or musicians, forget logic seems to be the way we live our lives. I'm not sure it's always good, but it's what we do. In this case, they asked me to do a film on the making of, and the standard making of film, everybody celebrates how wonderful the director were, how wonderful the actors were, how wonderful the associates were, how wonderful the whole project was. And I said, that doesn't interest me. What's intrinsically interesting is going to be some little story about some small event that represented something about being human, about fear or hope. So I said to Saul, wasn't there anything that happened that was really a surprise to you guys? And they said, yeah. Or as Mila said, let me tell you a story. And Mila told me a story. And I hope you enjoyed it and all the other stories, and tell your own story. It's probably worth telling.